Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophets Speak. Today we continue our study of the second book of Chronicles, that is Divrei Hayamim Bet. We are about to study chapter 3, that is Perek Gimel, and we are about to read about Shlomo, King Solomon's uh, construction project, and finally building the Holy Temple, the building which his father, King David, had so longed to build and had prepared for so well. And now Solomon spent the first several years of his being king, even adding more and getting even more supplies and workers, and everything is all set. So now it's time to start the project. This is a perfect time for us to review a little, just to understand the significance of this time in history. What is the purpose and point of a Beit HaMikdash? What is the purpose of this building, and how does it fit into the overall scheme, the arc of history, which is really what Divrei Hayamim is trying to portray? Remember, and we've mentioned this many times, Divrei Hayamim is at a particularly difficult and challenging time in the history of the Jewish people. It is being written at the beginning of the time of the Bayit Sheni, of the Second Temple period, where things, are tough. Things are looking bleak, but the people have a project to build a land, to build a new presence in their homeland, and to build a Beit HaMikdash, to build a second temple another time around. So this review is really to teach the people the significance. What's the point? What are we trying to accomplish? What is this building? Is it just some building? Is it just another fancy building? Is it just another building, a house of worship, of which there, of course, are many throughout the ancient world? Uh, you know, house is it we worshiping this God just like they're worshiping their God, etc. What's the point of all of this? So I'm going to start by reading the first couple verses in chapter 3, but then I'm going to pull out and I like step back a little bit and try to get a bird's eye view on what's happening here and why. So Vayachel Shlomo began livnot, to build at Beit Adonai B'Yerushalayim, the house of God in Jerusalem, Behar HaMoriah, on Mount Moriah. Now this term Har HaMoriah, the mountain of Moriah, is appears one other place. And that, of course, is at the Akedat Yitzchak, the story of the binding of Isaac in the book of Genesis, and where God told Abraham to bring Yitzchak to the land of Moriah. That's the only other place where this term appears. So the parallel is obvious. It's not coincidental. It's choosing to bring our attention to that event of the binding of Isaac, that event that occurred with Abraham and Isaac way back in history. And the choice of this place is obviously not coincidental, right? There's a reason why the same site where the binding of Isaac had occurred is the same site where the house of God is being built. And what's the significance of that? What's the importance of that? And why is that a crucial element in the choice of choosing this spot? And how does it help us understand the purpose of this building? Now, let's continue this verse a little bit before we answer that question. So, Asher Nira LeDavid Avihu, this is the spot um, upon which, uh, where he had appeared, he meaning God had appeared to his father David, right? And we read of that story. We were reminded of that several chapters ago in the end of Chronicles 1. That was at the end of the plague, where the plague had stopped on that spot. Asher Hechin Bimkom David, right? At the place which he had established, which God had established that place, in the place where David had this appearance, had this encounter with God. Begoren Arnon Hayevusi, which happened to be on the location of the granary of Arnon, or also sometimes his name Aravna. It's the same person, Hayevusi the Jebusite. There's a lot packed into this verse. First of all, the Har HaMoriah, the place of Moriah, and just it's almost one has to, of course, mention Moriah. What does the word mean? The Mount Moriah. So there's really several um, words in the root of Moriah. One is Hora'ah, is teaching, right? Is to teach, right? Which is the same root as the word Torah, right? The Torah is the teachings of God. So it is a place that represents teaching, a teaching from God to human beings. Moriah is also from the word re'iyah, to see. So it is the place where near right, where L'David Avihu, where God appears to us and where we see God's presence, right? We look and see God by seeing his temple and encountering God. So it is a place for us, number one, to come to learn, and number two, a place to come and see and approach and experience God's presence in our lives and in our world. And the third meaning of the word Moriah is from yirah, from the root which means to fear or to be in awe. So it is also a place where we experience awe of God. So this word Moriah, which is so intimately tied also with the story of the binding of Isaac, is really representative of these primary ideas. So, of number one, learning, right? In other words, getting the teachings from God and learning how we're supposed to live, how we're supposed to behave, and so on. And number two, seeing. It's a place where we encounter God, where we see God, where we experience him and bring him into our lives. And number three, we also learn the awe and fear of God, of his grandeur and magnificence, etc. So all of this being represented by these events, right? Now, as many know, there's many traditions that we have of all of the different events that occurred on this spot. Throughout the rabbinic writings, we have all kinds of traditions of things that occurred on this spot. This is the spot where Adam Arishon, the first human being, was created from this spot. All kinds of ideas, traditions. Those are traditions and they're important, and each one has its significance. But what we find in the verses themselves is this connection to Akedat Yitzchak. Now, in order to fully understand this, I want to go back to Devarim, to the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 12, where the commandment to build the Beit HaMikdash is written. And I'm going to read through that chapter so that we can understand the significance and also understand the connection between this spot, this building, and Akedat Yitzchak. Akedat Yitzchak, right, is the place in the Torah where we learn that God is not interested in human sacrifice. Human sacrifice, and we'll see this in a moment expressed in Devarim, in Deuteronomy, is the ultimate evil end of where a human being can go when he or she allows his heart to go into polytheism and paganism, right? The height of evil, the worst place you can end, is the place where you're sacrificing human beings. The last thing that God wants is human sacrifice. Now, I'm just saying this now. We're going to read this together in Deuteronomy soon. So, what we see here at this spot is a spot where God wants us to learn to focus on our relationship with Him and what He actually wants from us. And we're going to learn in a minute exactly what that is. So let's turn to Deuteronomy. We'll read this and it'll all make sense. I know we are supposed to be studying the book of Chronicles, not Deuteronomy, but here we go, because in order to understand the significance of this event, I think this is very important. So Deuteronomy 12. Ela hachukim v'hamishpatim asher tishmerun la'asos. These are the laws and the rules that I want you to be careful to do ba'aretz, in the land asher nosan Adonai Elohei avosecha l'chol arishta, that God is, the Lord of your fathers is giving to you to inherit. Kol hayomim, all of the days asher atem chayim al ha'adamah, that you live upon the earth. Now, so number one, God says, I'm telling you, is the hora'ah, is the teaching part of that word moriah, right? I'm telling you, these are the things that I want from you, right? As opposed to the things that I don't want from you, which we're going to get to in a minute. So you're going to start off by doing you need to destroy all of those places, all of those other places which were dedicated to pagan worship, where those other nations were worshiping. Because because now you are overtaking them at Elohim, you need to destroy all of their gods. And they were built al hehorim horamim v'al hagbaot, on all of the high mountains and the hills, v'tachas kol eitz ra'anan, and underneath the luxuriant trees. Okay. So the people had built these temples all over the place, the people that preceded you, and those temples led people, the implication is to do things that I didn't command, and to not do things that I do command. In other words, those are not those places, those temples led people not to the chukim mishpatim that I am commanding, but led them in the wrong direction. And you should destroy them. That's verse 3. Nitatz miduchosam, destroy them. But lo sasun kain ladonai Elohechem. However, for the Lord your God, this is not what you're going to do. Destruction is not what you're going to do when it comes to God, but rather building, right? Because what are you going to do for God? Verse 5. I'm skipping a little bit just for the sake of making the point here. Ki im el hamakom, but rather it is to that place asher yivchar Adonai Elohechem, the place which God chooses, right? Mikol shiftechem, from all of your tribes. In other words, the implication here is that it could have been anywhere, but God will choose the one that He chooses. And in this case, because David arose and David became the leader, and David was the one who followed God's ways in his humility, etc., and the stories that we've all studied together for so long. God will choose a place. So He will choose a place where He will reside, and then you will search that out and you will come there, right? In other words, you're coming to be taught, to learn. You're coming to search Him out, right? L'shichno sidrishu, because God will choose that spot. This is very important, right? It's important because it is not a human being that decides what he's going to give to God, right? But rather it is God who's deciding what He wants from us. This is a crucial element of monotheism, right? This is the crucial element of monotheism. We are here to follow God's rules. We are not here to decide what it is, where to build God's house, what we want. It's not up to us to decide how to worship God. It's up to God to decide, to tell us how to worship Him. And this then focuses on the yira, to see God. Where do we see God? Where He wants to be seen. And v'havesem shama, it is there that you will bring olosechem zevchechem, your karbanot, your sacrifices, right? Sacrifices, I don't want them anywhere else. I'm not interested in sacrifices anywhere else. I don't want you to decide in random places I want to give sacrifices. Only here. This is the only place. So that there should be a unity among the people. This is where you come. V'achaltem sham lifnei Adonai Elohechem, and there you will eat before God, usmachtem, and you will be happy. B'chol mishlach yedchem, you can celebrate all of the things that you succeed. In other words, God doesn't want from us to give up our lives, to give up, our happiness and joy in this world. He wants us to be joyous and to be happy with what we have in the context of understanding from whom this all comes, which is God Himself. You and your families, etc., with which God has blessed you. Lo sasun kechol asher anachnu osim po hayom, but don't do like we do today. Ish kol yeshar be'enav, which we'll see in a minute. Each person doing as he sees fit. In other words, you're not the one who decides, I am going to worship God here, I'm going to worship God in this way. Because think for a moment where that could lead. Even if it is done in a way that it is meant with proper intentions, right? When one truly wants to encounter and worship God, when people start going off in their own directions, it leads to very bad places, right? Rather, I want you to come here to this one place where people can learn and understand this unified message. So we're getting a sense so far of what the purpose and point of this Beit HaBechira, of this chosen place is, right? But there's still a lot more for us to see. Kilo vasem arata, because until now, until this point, which we're discussing, right? In other words, this point that at the point where it's being told in Deuteronomy, it's something that's going to happen in the future, but you haven't come yet el hamanucha, to the rest, el hanachla, and to the inheritance, asher Adonai lechanosin lach, right? Because it didn't happen yet, right? While you're wandering around, I understand that, people often will need to turn to God in various places, locations, and ways, and so on. But once you start setting up the nation that you're trying to set up, And once you settled in the land, it is extremely important at that point to focus your energy in the right direction, to focus it on, and therefore to have this one place where you can come to learn and encounter God, experience God, and and develop awe and fear of God. So then it goes on a little more. Va'avartim Arden is telling us what's going to happen in the future, which you and I studying Chronicles now just read when it happened, right? After it happened. Va'avartim Arden, you'll cross the Jordan and you will settle in the land, and God will get rid of all your enemies. That's verse 10. I kind of went through it quickly. And then, then in the place where God, the Lord your God, will choose, right, to rest his name, Shama Taviu. That's where you will bring that which I command you, your sacrifices and so on, and all of the mivchar nidrechem. Yes, there will be a place for your own what your own heart desires to give to me, but it will be here in this spot where you will come and do that, and you will be happy in front of this place, and you will also and who will you bring? You uvnechem and your children, uvnesechem and your daughters, v'abdechem and your servants and your maidservants, v'amosechem. V'halevi and the Levite asher b'sharechem who lives among you, he who teaches, he whose job it is to teach and lead and guide you spiritually, ki ein lo chelik v'nachla itchem, because he doesn't have a place, he's not part of your family. So here we're starting to get a sense. I want you to come here with your families so that all of you enjoy yourselves together with me, right? However, be careful, and we're getting close to what one of the key points here. Why is this so important? Why can't we have 10 places to go? Why can't each person decide, I want a temple in my backyard, right? Because God, what God wants, he said here, is I want you and your sons and your daughters and your servants, everyone who's a member of your family, and those that ain't lo chelik v'nachalatchem, and those who are not members of your family. What I want is human beings to come together, enjoy themselves in the proper context in front of God. Hishomer lecha, but be careful. Pen taleh olosecha, don't bring your karbanot, don't bring your sacrifices b'chol makom asher tireh, anywhere that you want. Rather, ki im b'makom asher yivchar Adonai, only in the place. V'sham taseh, only there, right? Yes, it's fine. God says in verse 15, you can eat food, rak b'chol avas nafshecha tizbach. You can slaughter animals and you can have feasts. You can eat at home, right? As long as you keep the rules of kosher and you eat hatomei right? As long as you eat the foods that are proper and appropriate. Rak hadam lo sochilu, be careful not to eat blood, and so on. But what's the point here? Lo sucha lechol b'sharecha. However, right, the things that you devote to God, right, when you're worshiping God, do not eat that at your home, masar de gancha, those things that you separate from your grains and your wines and oils and your animals and so on. Those things you need to come to bring to God. In verse 18, ki im lifnei Hashem elokecha, only bring them before the Lord your God, tochlenu. Right? And again, he emphasizes, Ato, you and your sons and your daughters, Uvincho, Vitecha, Viavducha, Vamasecha, Vihalevi, Asher B'Sharacha, and the Levite who is among you, who is not a member of your family, V'samachta Lefnei Hashem L'kecha, B'chol Mishlach, and then you can enjoy. Hishamar Lecha, but be careful, Pendazo V'Salevi, don't leave out the people that aren't members of your family, right? Enjoy, bring them in too. Why so much emphasis over and over again? You and your sons and your daughters. Hold on for a second and we're going to find out. Because it says, right, and I'm skipping a little bit here, right, it reminds us of several things, right? Lo tochlenu, do not eat blood. And went to verse 25, that it should be good for you, ki ta'aseh hayashar be'einei Adonai, because then you're going to do what is proper in the eyes of God, which is what I just described, right? I'm skipping a little bit more. Right? Because what would happen if you didn't listen to me, right? What would be the end result? So if we keep on moving here, and I'm skipping a couple of verses, like, because what the other nations did, verse 29, that God cut away in front of you, because God has taken away those nations that you're coming to inherit, the lands which those nations used to be in, right? And you are going to settle their lands. Hishamar lecha, be careful, because if you start doing worship all over the place, pentinokesh acharem, you are going to go ahead and start thinking, oh, if you come to the central place, then you're going to learn the ideas and the Torah, which I am teaching you, the chukim and the mishpatim, the laws and the judgments, which I am teaching you, right? But if you're going to follow your own heart, then you're going to start to wonder, what about those nations that used to worship here? How did they do it? Maybe I could learn something, right? Maybe this is a nice way to do it. You're going to go and start searching out those other gods, those pagan gods, and say, how did they serve their gods? The Esekain Gamoni, let me follow them. And what was the end result? And here's the final kicker here. Don't do that to God, because you know what happens when you go down that path of paganism? You know what happens when you go down that path of polytheism? You start thinking that anything goes, anything goes, everything is okay to worship God. And the next thing you're going to do is you're going to end up doing kichol to avat Adonai asher soneh. They have done disgusting things that God hates. Asu lelohem. All the way to kigam et b'neihem v'et b'notehem yisru v'eish lelohem. So much so that their sons and their daughters, they burned in flames in worship of their gods. Because that is where that can lead. It can lead to the most awful, most terrible, most horrendous kind of thing which God is not interested in. When human beings are looking, when you come to the Beit HaMikdash, you learn that what God wants from us is chukim and mishpatim. He wants us laws. He wants us to keep the rules. He wants us to keep the morals and ethics that he's teaching us, right? That's what he wants from us. And when you come to this one place, this is where you will learn to do that. So yes, you can bring sacrifices, but bring them here, because this way you will all remain focused. But if you start going off in your own directions, then people start to think, well, what do I want to give to my God, right? How do I placate God, this God or that God? Well, I placate this God by giving him animals. I placate this God by giving him gold. I placate this God by giving him all of my possessions. I placate the other God by giving him, God forbid, my son or my daughter. So here we have the connection between the Akedat Yitzchak. The primary lesson of the story of the binding of Isaac is, of course, the lesson that God is not interested in that kind of sacrifice. The truth is that what we really see from here is that God is not really interested in sacrifice at all. He understands, as Maimonides explains so beautifully, he understands that people want to give to their God. They want to give back. They want to feel like they want to do nidavot, right? They want to give from the goodness of their heart to God. So God says, yes, here is the place to do it. And here you will learn together with the Levi, together with your children and sons and daughters, what I want you to do is to celebrate with them in front of me, not, God forbid, to sacrifice them and give them to me. I want to give you so many things. I want you to celebrate the bounty and the goodness that I give you, and keep the laws and the rules that I command you, and follow the ways that I tell you to follow. This is the significance of the house that Shlomo is building today. And this is the connection. The main lesson of Akedat Yitzchak is, yes, there is an importance to the desire to serve God and worship him and to give of ourselves to him. It is a natural desire. One thinks, well, I want to get something from someone, in this case, God. I want to have a good life. So I want to give him something. This Beit HaMikdash represents a completely different mindset, right? God is not interested in getting things from us. What God is interested in is the chukim u'mishpatim, is the laws that he teaches us at Har Moriah, the place where we are taught. The place where we encounter God is a place where we learn how to live, not how to sacrifice to him. If we followed our own hearts, we would end up sacrificing, giving, and giving until, as we see in so many cultures across the ancient world, until we give the most precious things in the world, even our own children, which is horrific to think about, but it is unfortunately something which, as we know, is so highly practiced. Now that we understand this is the place where David encountered God. This is the place where Abraham and Isaac learned that incredibly important lesson. Now we can understand what the importance of this chapter is here and why we discuss the building of this building. So Vayachel, now I'm going back to Chronicles 3, which is, of course, the purpose of today is to learn this chapter. Verse 2, Vayachel livnos b'chodesh hasheni b'sheni, on the second day of the second month, he began to build Bishnas Arba l'malchuso, in the fourth year of his reign. The first few years, he augmented the supplies that David had left with all of the things we read about in the first two chapters. Now he's ready to build. Ve'elahu sad Shlomo livnos beis Elohim, and these are the measurements of that Shlomo laid down the foundations for when he built the house of God. Ha'orach, the length was Amos Bemida Harishona Amos Yishim, 60 cubits, Verochav Amot Esrim, and the width was 20 cubits. V'ha'ulam asher pnei orach, and the length of the ulam, which is can be translated as a porch or a portico of sorts, which went along the length. Al pnei rochav habayis amos esrim. It was 20 wide, and the height was 120. And he coated it on the inside with pure gold. I'm not going to go too much into the details of the measurements, but just to get the general idea that it was a very grand, very beautiful building, plated with gold on the inside. You can only imagine what it would have looked like by going in. The purpose, of course, is to impress people and put them in the frame of mind where of Hora'ah, a place that they're coming to learn, a place where they can learn the awe of God, etc. That's the importance of this. And the house, the large house itself, Chipa Eitz Broshim, he coated it. In other words, the base was stone, but the stone was faced with wood, and Vaychapeu Zahav Tov, and a really good quality gold was coated over the wood. Wood, you can't really coat stone with gold, so that's why but stone is much stronger. So the walls are stone, faced with wood, and then on top of the wood was the gold. Vayalal of Timorim B'Shar Sharos, and and the gold was engraved with designs of palm trees and chains. And he studded the inside of the house with precious stones, litiferes, so that they should be beautiful, and vahazav zav parvayim, and the zav was a from a place called Parvayim, which is presumably a very pure, a very fancy and good quality gold. And he overlaid the beams and the thresholds and the doorways with gold. Pitach kruvim al akirot, and all over the walls were also designed pictures of keruvim, of cherubs, of keruvim. When we understand what we just said, and this is, the image of children, a crew, a cherub is the image of a child with wings flying. Now remember, the whole point of this Beit HaMikdash is to lead us in a completely different direction when it comes to worship of gods. The worship of gods, the old way, the polytheistic way, the pagan way, was one which led one to take precious children, and sacrifice them to the God by by a person thinking that he's giving the God what is most precious to him. The image of a cherub as with wings is to indicate the holiness and preciousness of children, of our families, and that we should embrace them and celebrate with them, as we read together in Deuteronomy, with B'naihem, with your sons, B'notehem, and with your daughters, and your servants, and everyone all together celebrate. And we all come close to God together. We fly towards God on the wings of our families, of our children, of our relationships. This is what God wants. And this is that's why we emphasize, and when we read together in Deuteronomy, everyone should come together to celebrate together, to enjoy the bounty that God gives us. This is what this house represents. Vayasis Beis Kodesh HaKodashim, and he made, this is verse 8, the place of the Holy of Holies, Arko, Al Pnei Rochav Habayis Amos Esrim, its length along the width of the house was 20 amos, v'rachbo amos esrim, v'chapeu zahav tov l'kikarim sheish meos, 600 talents of gold. I'm not necessarily translating every single word here, simply because we get the idea. And of course, anyone that has studied the Book of Kings with us remembers that there the detail was much more detailed. Here it's just giving us mostly just the grandioseness the beauty, the gold, the size, the impressiveness of the building. Umishkalim mismros l'shkalim chamishim zav, v'aliyas chipazav. He covered the upper chambers with gold, and each nail that held things together was made of 50 shekels of gold, golden nails. Vayas beveis kodesh hakodashim, and within the holy of holies, he made kruvim shnayim, another two cherubs. These are in addition to the cherubs, to the kruvim which were on top of the holy ark. Maasei tzatzuim, they were they were sculptured in such a way by Atzapuo Samzav. They were sculptured. It doesn't say here what they were sculptured out of. It could have been stone, it could have been wood, but either way, they were sculptures and they were covered with gold. So presumably they were made of wood. The Chanfei HaKruvim Arkom Amos Esrim, and the wings of the Kruvim were 20 amos long. So this image again of the beautiful child with wings, representing the connection between our families and our relationship with God. The wings designating our, flying up to God, and our relationship with God. So they were knafa echad la'amos chamesh. One wing was 5 cubits long, magas l'kir abayis, which was touching the walls. V'yakanafa acheres amos chamesh. Another 5 was magia l'chnafa kruva acher. So the total of all 4 wings was 20 amos, each one being 5. Apparently, it sounds like the wings. One was going in open. The wings were open. One flying. One wing towards the wall and the other wing towards where the Aron Kodesh was in the middle. So the wings were touching each other, and again, as we just described before in the last verse, the wings of these cherubs, porsim amos esrim, they were spread out over 20 amos. Again, the same measurement, and they were standing on their feet, and they were facing God. So the encounter between our children, our families, which enables us to fly upward. If we follow this path that God is asking us to follow, then our relationship will be upward towards God. And that is what he wants from us. And he made the curtain that cordoned off the Holy of Holies out of blue wool and purple wool and fine linen and crimson, which is red colored wool. Vayal olav kruvim, and he also drew the images of kruvim on the curtains. Vayas lifnei habayis amudim shnayim, and he made before the house, he made 2 pillars, right? Amos shloshim v'chamesh orech, they were 35 amos high, which v'hatzefet asher al rosho amos chamesh, and then the capital on top of these pillars was another 5 amos. So that's a total of 40, which is somewhere about 60 feet high. Vayas sharsharos badvir, he made sharsharos are like an artwork of a pattern of chains. Vayitein al rosh hamudim, and he put that on top of the pillars. Vayas rimonimea, and he made 100 pomegranate-shaped designs. Vayitein basharsharos, and he hung them upon or placed them upon the chains. Vayakam es ha'amudim, and he stood up these big, beautiful pillars al pnei ha'heichal, in front of the heichal, which is literally means a large hall, which over here is talking about the heichal is referring to the large, not the Holy of Holies, but in front of the entrance to the entire Kodesh, the entire section of the holy part. Right. Remember, there's the outside where the Mizbeach, where we'll talk a little bit more about the details later. I'm not huge on going into the details, but just the basic structure of the building should be familiar to many of us. But the outer part is where the sacrifices are taking place. And then there's the heichal, within which you have the menorah, the candelabra, and we have the table for the showbread, etc. And then there's the Holy of Holies. So the heichal is referring to the holy part, which includes the Holy of Holies, but also the rest. And in front of the heichal, echad miyamin ve'echad mi'asmol, on the right and on the left, he placed these pillars. Vayikra Shem Hayimani Yachin v'Shem Hasmali Boaz, and he called one of them Yachin and the other one Boaz. These are famous names. Exactly what they mean is there's all kinds of interpretations, but let's just try to be as basic as possible. As many of the commentaries explain, Yachin means to establish, right? Or to build. So Yachin would mean he established, right? So calling it Yachin is saying he, obviously he with a capital He, God established. And Boaz seems to be a contraction. Az is strength, right? And Bo is within him. So he established, right, this place, and within him is our strength. I know that there's a lot of ways to interpret the words. I just chose one, which is as close to the meaning of the words as possible, although, one can debate that. But I just wanted to share one nice understanding of what Yachin Uboaz means. God establishes this place, not us, right? And think about what we studied together in Deuteronomy. And Boaz, it is within him, God, that we find strength, not within ourselves to find a source of strength. So this concludes Chronicles, the book 2, chapter 3. Thank you so much for studying this together with me. Looking forward, of course, to studying chapter 4 together and the rest of this wonderful book of Chronicles. Have a wonderful day.